All right, so Trials feels really, really tough this week, but I also think it felt really tough last week on Endless Veil. Matchmaking was the same as it usually is last week. It's messed up and different this week, and everyone's assuming this week's so tough because the matchmaking changes. I disagree. I think I know why Trials feels so much harder lately, and I think it's because of fire team-based matchmaking, and here's what's happening. For the people who are in 3v3s, it's pretty much like Freelance is always out. And in the past, when Freelance was out, 3v3 Trials felt really hard. There weren't that many people playing Trials that were willing to get teams of 3, so it was sweaty. There were less teams to match. The 3v3 Trials was sweaty. But what about the solo queue? Why is it so much harder this week and last week than usual? Because people are learning they should be duo queuing. What's happening is you've got so many people in the solo queue that are running duos. And that means most of your matches as a solo are actually not 1v1v1v1v1 with 6 people, you know? It's 1v2v2v1. And as a solo, when you've got a duo on your team and the enemy team, it might be a fair fight, but your experience as a solo is still a lot harder when you've got the other team having 2 players that communicate, that have some builds up chemistry together, that can call out when you're one-shot. Your experience in solos, because of all the duos, is now going to be really tough. And my experience in the 3v3, because everyone's in that other queue, is now going to be really tough. Last week, it was really hard. This week, it's really hard. The new matchmaking with this is this week. It was not last week. So what's the big difference then? I believe it's fire team-based matchmaking that is making it so both the solo queue plus duos and the 3v3 is a whole lot tougher right now. What's the answer? I don't know, because I love the ability for people to be able to queue solo. I love that. I think it's great for the game. But I do believe that's what's making Trials so freaking hard in both queues right now. Is that we've got the solo queue just being basically duo queue, and everyone's getting ran by it. And then you've got the 3v3 queue where there's just like very few teams to fight, because most people are in the solo duo queue. I don't know how to fix it. I think solos should be able to queue, but that's my take on why Trials is so hard in both freaking queues. I've been thinking about it a lot recently, chat, and holy crap. I would love to read every freaking comment in there. There's a lot of people typing, but I've thought about it a lot, and it's been a struggle for me. Is I'm like, we can talk about it more. Week 1 and week 2 didn't feel that tough. There were a lot of people playing in both the 3s and the solo playlist, and in the solo playlist, it was actually mostly solos, and it didn't feel that tough. And I'm like, what changed going into week 3? Because Endless Veil week 3 of Trials this season was difficult. And there's nothing wrong with Trials being difficult, by the way. I want to make that point clear. A lot of people like to be like, but it's the end game content. It's supposed to be hard. Yet everybody who has a hard time in Trials likes to be trying to dissect and figure out why it's so tough. Like, that's just how it goes. When you're used to going flawless and it's difficult, you're like, man, what's making this tough? When you can't go flawless and you're bitching about it on Twitter and YouTube, even though you also then go and complain about, hey, it's endgame content, it's supposed to be tough. Like, it's okay to dissect what's making it difficult. Everybody wants a better population. What happened between week 1 and 2 and then 3, I couldn't figure it out. Why was Endless Veil's weekend so freaking hard? And it wasn't just hard for me. Everybody in my chat was talking about how much harder their solo experience was. Everybody. And now it's week 4, and everyone's talking about how much harder their solo experience is. That was one of the only 5-0 games I've had, like, in the last 2 days, I swear. I think that's what it is, though, dudes. I think as more and more people are learning that the duo queue is the way to go in solos, and as less and less people are playing, we're really feeling that in the 3v3 playlist. There's nothing else that makes sense, because the matchmaking last week was the same as it usually is, and now it's way different this week. But both results are exactly the same, a very difficult Trials week. So you can't say it's the matchmaking causing it when last week we also had a really difficult situation. They're sharing the same experience, you know? Both weeks are sharing the same really difficult experience. There's got to be something else that is leading towards that, and I really believe it's what I'm explaining. Maybe that's something to do with it, but last week the player pop dropped 26% for the previous Trials week. This week is another 15%. Jeez. Well, that obviously has something to do with it too, but that's what I'm saying is the population drop makes us feel it. That's what I'm saying, dude. Is that in weeks 1 and 2, we didn't really notice it as much because the population was fine. As soon as the population drops, we really freaking feel these differences. It's just because the population's thinning like normal. But chat, like, you can use stats to determine. Stats don't mean that much, right? But they are a good representation of things, okay? This is my lowest week KD in a year and a half.
Right.
And it's week 4 of a new annual DLC.
It no longer does. Like a nice good kill.
And sure, maybe I'm just playing like crap. That's possible. I could just be playing terribly.
I'm gonna ape in here.
But you got to understand, this isn't just population decreasing naturally. There's something else at play here that is making this so much more difficult.
What was that?
The common denominator is Bungie and how out of touch they are with PvP. They're so set on skill base and not connection and win matching. But dude, this is theoretically connection based right now.
Got one shot.
My mouse cord got underneath my mouse.
I got both of them weak.
Resonate. You should have an angle. Oh, this guy right there. Okay, nice. This guy's already on his bow.
Yeah, he's one.
Well, that's good.
Anyway, I just think it's an interesting conversation. I thought about it a lot yesterday because if y'all are new to the channel, or if y'all are not new, hopefully you know this already. I'm a pretty logical guy. I like to try to think through things with like logic and reason and understand why things work the way they work. That's just who I am. I don't like when things don't make any sense. Usually I'm really in sync with trials and I understand what's going to make a week easier or harder based on a lot of different variables out there. Like, why is this week going to be easier or harder than other weeks? And I got blindsided by both last week and this week being so difficult. So I had to spend a lot of time trying to think about it and try to understand, like, what the heck is the thing leading towards trials being so difficult? And that doesn't mean just me complaining about it. It means everybody in chat talking about how trials is way too freaking tough. It's so difficult now. Like, that's more what I'm referring to. After thinking it through with all my trials experience and whatnot and understanding every matchmaking angle ever because I've been in all of them, I think that's what it is. I think them rehashing loot has more to do with it than you think, though, because people have all they need and the loot is not enough for people to go through the heartache of facing stacks for a gun they already have. I think that a lot of the arguments y'all are making, like that one right there, Astral, has to do with why the population is decreasing maybe a little bit faster than we're used to. But it doesn't have to do with what I'm talking about. If you think back to freelance, I mean, it has a little bit to do with it. The population decreasing has something to do with it, but this is more severe than just that. If you think back to freelance, when there used to be a freelance node, what happened in the 3v3 playlist? It became very difficult and sweaty. Nobody wanted to play in it. We essentially always have that now, which is why I believe the 3v3 playlist is so difficult. But then you got to turn it around and try to figure out what makes the solo duo playlist so difficult, because it's very different in the solo duo than it used to be. And that's the inclusion of it's not freelance anymore. It's actually just solo duo. So now you've got both playlists having this big thing that makes them way tougher than they used to be. You've got very little population in 3v3 compared to how it used to be because everyone's playing solo duo. And in solo duo, you have so many good players that instead of running threes are running stacked duos. And all the solos go 1v2, v2, v1, just having a hard time because everyone's coordinating better than them. Everyone's communicating and calling out and coordinated. And a stacked duo is really tough to fight against when you're a solo. Even if you win the game, like, you're still probably getting dumpstered on. Your team of two's probably helping you most. It's just crazy. Even when freelance wasn't out, how often were we matching solos, Patty? In the threes, a ton. A ton. Between August 21, when there was that rehash with trials, and now with fire team-based matchmaking, when you're in that threes playlist and freelance was not out, you would match solo duos or solos a ton.
I should die.
And duos, but mostly solos a ton. It's fun. It's so ironic that I'm literally having my easiest, smoothest games in the last 3 days while we're having this conversation. It's ironic and funny. So would you say they should walk back the fire team-based matchmaking? That's what's tough, dudes. Like, fire team-based matchmaking is an amazing concept, right?
Oh, all right.
It allows solos and duos to play the playlist without feeling like it's unfair because they're matching threes and whatever else they might have problems with, right? It's actually so good for them. But I think it has all these adverse effects that we maybe didn't think about originally. I knew when they mentioned fire team-based matchmaking, it might be tough for threes. I didn't realize how tough, and I didn't realize it would also be kind of devastating for solos too. I love the idea of fire team-based matchmaking in theory. That's the really important point here. I'm nervous about the adverse effects that it has, though, on the playlist. And those adverse effects are what I'm discussing right now. I screwed that up about as bad as I could. I missed a bunch of shots, and I missed my nade. So what about only freelance and duo, or in threes? No duos? I don't know, dude. Would it make more sense to go back to how it was before? We get freelance once every 3 weeks, and on that 1 out of 3 weeks, you know duos, or you know that threes is going to be terrible. And the other 2 weeks, you just got a solo queue if that's what you want to do. People are going to get mad at me for even suggesting that. But I don't know what the right answer is. How do you possibly satisfy everybody's craving to be playing threes in a populated way, to be playing solos in a fair and populated way? I can't think of a system that allows for that in every capacity. It's difficult to think of. I believe the system that we have is going to be very very bad in the long run for both playlists. But I really love fire team-based matchmaking. I do too. I love the idea behind it. Dude, when they mentioned it for trials, I was like, this won't be good for threes, but this is a great idea. Like, I'm on team fire team-based matchmaking in theory. And Patty, you would go flawless without it. You've got good players that you play with. You could go into the freelance node. Remember when that was a thing? You go flawless in that all the time. I don't think there's a correct answer. I'm wondering how it's going to go. But what's making trials bad? Well, that's sort of what we're talking about. The word bad is just random. I'm just throwing it out. Bad just means difficult and sweaty in each playlist. And some people like to laugh and be like, that's how it's supposed to be. But nobody enjoys trying to go flawless when it feels like it's impossible for everyone, right? So that's why I'm using the term bad. What makes it bad?
Oh my god.
Because usually it's not bad in the freelance playlist, but it's bad in the threes playlist when the two exist together. But right now it's bad in each playlist. It's tough having these conversations when everybody's got different angles. Like, some of y'all are anti-sweat, screw these good players, like screw Jake, he just wants easier games. Some of you are .2s who just want to figure out a way to win half your matches, which would require like heavy skill-based. Some of you are right in the middle and you're trying to understand what could possibly lead to you maybe managing a flawless or two every once in a while. And we all got different angles, so you got to try to take a step back and think objectively, which isn't always that easy. It's tough, dude. It's tough.
All right, here we go.
The origination of this conversation is the point I really wanted to make, though, is that I believe that the reason for matchmaking being so tough for everybody is because of what I said originally. What about creating a solo, a duo, and a trio matchmaking pool? No, that would not fix it. First of all, that divides the player base into 3 pools instead of 2, which is a bad idea for population. Second of all, there's no such thing as a duo pool in 6v6. How do you get the third on your team? So no, that wouldn't work in any way. You just make it 2v2 trials? No, that's just dividing the player base into 3 pieces instead of 2. The real issue is that the noob community wants to succeed in a skill game mode. God, I disagree with that so fucking passionately. Chat, there's 3 people on each team, right? You take 1 of the spots in your team. That leaves 2 on your team and 3 on the other team, okay? So there's 5 slots to fill. If there's a terrible noob player in the game, there's a 60% chance they're against you. Noob players being in the game makes the matches feel easier. You're arguing a completely opposite case right now. You want noobs to be in the game. People with that mentality are so toxic for this playlist because you want the people that are newer to Destiny to try Crucible. You want them to try trials. That gives a healthy population, dude. That's what you want. When there's a not so great player and people are shit talking them and scaring them away from the playlist, that toxic mentality that's causing them to be scared to try again is part of the reason why the playlist is difficult. Is because you're scaring away the players that we want to be willing to try trials. They just want to get some XP and some loot. We want it to be a noob-friendly experience, dude. Even if they get 5-0'd, we want them to not have somebody in their DMs telling them they fucking suck and to leave the playlist. It's ridiculous. We need to shit the mindset of I always get the shitter on my team. I agree with that, Stonewall. Literally 60% of the time, if there is somebody who's really not great at the game, they're going to be against you. Unless it's you that's really not great at the game. Then they're on your team every time. But that's a different situation we're talking about. Only thing I can argue is that lobby balancing affects that for players like you and I. When I solo queue, I check stats and know who's going to be on my team by looking at who's the worst in the lobby. I don't think there's lobby balancing. There's not supposed to be lobby balancing. You're 100% sure, Wraith, there's lobby balancing? There's not supposed to be. Other streamers are saying it. There's not supposed to be. You're joking if you think there isn't. I don't play enough solos to know, I guess. I go solo flawless a decent amount of times, though. If there was really lobby balancing, how am I still winning 7 in a row? This conversation's been good. It's also been exhausting. I kind of put out my pitch, and my main pitch was just trying to put a summary out there for why I think everybody's discussing how difficult Trials is, and it's sort of earlier in the season than people are used to it being that way. I put out my summary for why I believe that to be the case. That was really my entire intention. It turned into a 40-minute back and forth conversation, which was good in a lot of ways, but I am exhausted